About this on the weekend and tell me on Monday what you're going to do that's different. So on the Friday, I'd sat in his office wearing a really nice Italian three-piece suit made for me. Beautiful piece, because I was doing something unusual in business in those days. And then on the Monday, I walked in wearing a pair of New Rock boots, a pair of black leather trousers, a black shirt, full-length black Matrix-style coat, even before Matrix was out as a film. And he calmly looked up and said, "I think you've made some changes this weekend, haven't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah. I've always been kinky. There's a community out there somewhere. I'm going to find it and join it." And his response was to reach a manual off the shelf, pull it down, and go, "OECD classification 58, post-traumatic stress disorder." Flicked a few pages further on, OECD classification 65, consensual sadomasochistic behaviour. Because actually in those days it was considered to be a mental health condition. And when we first started LAM in 2006, one of the risks that we had to address was that they might turn up and attempt to section me live on stage. Okay? Now the good news is, within 12 to 18 months, I stood on that stage and said, "Hey everyone, good news, F65 is gone." And they cancelled sadomasochistic behaviour as a mental health disorder. Okay? Huge weight off so many of our minds. It really was. That's not to say that the world suddenly got better and we were accepted. It still took 3 volumes of that fucking awful book to get us across the line. Okay? And we're still not across the line. You know, you want to dress in leather and rubber and go into a pub on a Sunday in the city, you've got to hope it's the first Sunday of the month and we're on. Because I don't think you're going to survive very long in Weatherspoons or All Bar One, dressed head to toe in your fetish finery. And that's why it's an important space. As a person who has been kinky, poly, and open about this for a very long time, you know, you stick your head above the parapets and someone is going to shoot you sooner or later. So as a result, I have a huge lived experience myself. I often talk about SM and the law, partly because I've been part of the Spanner Trust for the last 18 or so years, but also because I have personal experience of police being complete cockwombles. Okay? 2017, knock on the door, search warrant, human trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation. One of the nice big ones, that one. As it turns out, the ex-partner of a friend of mine decided to say that she'd been trafficked by this person, and the US immigration and police decided, great, we're going after the bad man and his bad man market. Because they honestly believed that, you know, as well as clothes, toys, floggers, rope and all of the rest, we were selling people at LAM. Yeah. Now, the funny thing is, again, helps being neurodivergent, I first met this person, who later accused me, in 2005. And LAM started in 2006. So there were so many errors in the whole thing that I ended up having a 3.5-hour stand-up session at the expense of the Metropolitan Police. Because every single item that was so blindingly obvious and should have been checked with and validated with due diligence, I threw back at them. How did I buy this person in 2005 when the company didn't start till 2006? Why isn't this adding up? Ooh, you've put this on the search warrant. And that legislation didn't apply in those days because it's now off the books. They were convinced that I was this big human trafficker, and yet the search warrant said remove everything from my property that indicates I'm into a BDSM lifestyle. So I'm either into the BDSM lifestyle or I'm a human trafficker. I can't see how I can actually be both, in my mind anyway. Police, different species, different concept. So for 3.5 hours, I basically battered them around the room, took the piss, and I think my biggest insult was on the subject of when they said to me, how do you acquire the people you play with? So I'm like, the police legislation says don't ask stupid and pointed questions. Well, that's a big one. So, as you said, acquire, I'm going to be very clear from the start that no money changes hands whatsoever. It's a little bit like you guys. And they kind of look at each other. What on earth's going on? I said, uniformed services, you only really understand each other. So the police hang out with the fire and the ambulance staff, and they're all starting to nod. And I'm like, and it's because, psychologically you're all the same, and they're nodding again. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's because the fucking paramedics and the fire staff take one for the rest of society. They're the only ones who are prepared to hang out with you cunts, and it's no different to us. We are the redhead stepchildren of the rainbow community. We have to have our own events because, we're not always welcome everywhere. So as a result, we meet in a pub and someone comes along and says, oh, those pictures you put up yesterday, I really liked it. Can you do it to me? And I go, can I do this and this at the same time? And they say yes. And we make a time to do it. That's how it works. So it's one of those. There are perceptions of kink from outside, and there are perceptions of kink within the community. And the reality is, this has to be the broadest possible church that you could imagine. You've probably heard the phrase, your kink is okay, but it's not my kink, or I hope you have. Absolutely sacrosanct, okay? If someone is getting their jollies doing something that you really don't like at all, celebrate the fact that they are enjoying it, okay? And think to yourself, should I be so fucking lucky as to have that smile on my face, okay? Because actually, if you approach it with the type comment, the person standing next to you might be sitting there going, God, I fucking wish I could do that. You've just blown your chance. It's as simple as that, okay? Because no one likes that judgmental snidey. And I know it's difficult when you first come out and you will see things that are challenging to you, okay? But please understand that that is your issue to address. Don't make it other people's, okay? Because if you make the mistake of making it someone else's, someone is going to come along and go, it's not a them issue, it's a you issue. You need to work on that, because if you're coming into this space, you need to respect the space and everyone else who uses it. Mentioned SM and the law. A couple of other ones. I was once investigated by the Met for being an intimidating man dressed entirely in black, brandishing implements of sexual torture. What I was actually doing is auctioning off a deceased friend of mine's assets to pay for her funeral. On Pride weekend as well. The police officers, as part of their investigation, interviewed someone and had the balls to say, the poster that's behind him, and we've got one with the Lamb logo and the Lambchester logo, and they said, the sheep, the bee, do you think it's an indication of bestiality? Well, my letter to the IOPC on that one was, perfect. Because I invited the officers, if you think that any form of bestiality can be done with bees, please come and see me. I've got some really good ideas involving a pint glass and a colony of bees. They lost my complaint. When I rang up and said I'd like an update on my complaint number, it's not on the system, sir. Really odd, that? And recently, when I had a reason to call the police, I found them absolutely delightful. Anything that I needed was done instantaneously. I've had regular update calls from them saying, just checking to make sure you're okay with the status of the case and what's going on. We don't need you in court. It's all going to be handled for you. Chalk and cheese. Okay? Interestingly enough, others who went through similar issues at the same time, very different outcomes from the police. They didn't get the restraining orders they requested. They didn't have people moved out of locations on multiple occasions because they turned up drunk. Okay? Police don't normally behave like this, so I think they are ultimately starting to learn. Either that, or, you know, there's enough openly kinky police officers that they're realising that, you know, they're turning on their own to some extent. A couple of things I'd like to share with the room, particularly those that are relatively new. Okay? No one in this universe hatched out of an egg knowing all of kink. Okay? It's a huge, massive, vast technical subject. There are still multiple things that I have never done, and I'm not going to do them until I can find someone who can train me appropriately. Now, there might be slightly some of the more extreme things, like suturing people's body parts together, but if I'd have rushed and attempted to do everything, like get through the checklist as fast as possible, I'd be disappointed at this stage in feeling that I'd done everything. Yeah. So take your time, work at the pace that you are comfortable with. Okay? If you're new to going out to events and stuff, the best advice I can give you is several days, if not weeks beforehand, decide what you want to do. Set your own limits before you leave the house, and congratulate yourself when you come back to the house with those limits still being intact. Okay? Because that means that next time you can push those limits a step or two further, rather than going out, ending up doing something that you regret, having buyer's remorse, and then going, that's it, I'm no longer going to do anything in kink. Because what happens is, you come back 6 to 12 months later, most people are going to be decent and not say, ooh, what happened? I thought you were disappearing to celebrate the end of the world in some remote cabin in France. A friend of mine did it. Gave up the whole thing because the world was going to end, and then came back to London when the world didn't end 4 years later. Okay? Now, the problem is with this kind of community, the churn rate is quite high, so the vast majority of people didn't remember who she was, but enough of us did that very quickly she decided it wasn't worth kind of re-establishing in London, because, you know, you can't lose that kind of history of declaring that the world is about to end and you're moving to the location in Europe that's furthest from every single nuclear power station. I get the logic, but I think I'd have been looking for something a little bit more concrete than, you know, the Mayan calendar aligned in this particular way. Okay? And that way, you can build things in exactly the same way that you look at building connections and relationships. Okay? Never in a million, well, I was going to point and say never in a million years would you do something that filthy on the first date, but I know your reputation. And equally, if that's what you want to do and you are comfortable doing that, you should be free to do that. Okay? But certainly if you are new and establishing your feet, work from the most stable foundation that you can. Okay? If you don't understand something, then what a great resource here. All the stall holders know their stuff. The stuff that they sell, they can talk to you about it, explain it to you, talk about sensations, why some people are into it, why some people don't like it, etc. Why some people think of it as a pleasure, Why for others it's a punishment, okay? Because you've got to understand what it means to you, okay? Because it's not really about understanding kink,